Tusitala and the Prince, a fable by David Evans, read by Jamie Richard Stewart. Once upon a time, in a land so far away that no one has ever been there in the whole history of storytelling, there lived a little boy. His name was Tusitala, and he looked like every other poor boy you know from stories, not all of them true, who live in lands where the sun is hot, and there are chickens to steal and oranges to pick when farmers aren't looking. Tusitala wasn't tall, and he wasn't short. He wasn't fat like a puppy, or skinny like a greyhound, and although he had the darkest of dark brown hair, his eyes were the purplest of blue. They were beautiful eyes, piercing, like violets that sprout in the dark of a forest, parting the leaves of the ivy as their petals unfold in the sunlight. Tusitala lived in a big camp at the edge of a forest, with many families and many other children with whom he sometimes played. I say sometimes because Tusitala was a different sort of boy. He had never known his mother or father, and he had no brothers or sisters. He had been brought up by all the other families, although no one family ever claimed him, because in the end everyone thought him strange. Not strange enough to cast out, just strange enough to keep at arm's length. And because he was different, they were a little afraid of him, tolerating him more than liking him. This camp didn't move, but that doesn't matter. It was the men who moved, sometimes to find work, sometimes to hunt, leaving the women and young children behind for days or weeks at a time. The older boys went with them, but never Tusitala. He was never invited to join them, and when the men came back and boasted of what they had done and seen and stolen, he was glad they had not taken him. The other children were wary of Tusitala, because he never wanted to be part of their games. He would sit by himself, often for hours, at the side of the ring formed by the caravans and tents, and do nothing but stare at the others playing the same games again and again. Then a knot of children would form in front of him, whispering amongst themselves, wondering what was the matter with him. The mothers would also whisper and wonder as they watched, even those who had held him in their arms as a child, who had fed him and bathed him when he was little. Tusitala was oblivious to their concern and remained impassive, his blue eyes with the hint of purple unblinking. "What are you staring at, Tusitala?" one of the children would ask. "Yes," a mother would say, dropping to a squat and trying to put her brown arms around him, trying to love him, trying to make him love her, as they always tried. "What do you see?" Tusitala's answer was always the same as he gently disentangled himself from the embrace. "You know what I see, mother. My dreams," he would say. "I see my dreams." And then the women would laugh, and the children would laugh and mock him, saying, "You silly boy, Tusitala, you cannot see your dreams." "Daydreaming, more like," was the mother's verdict. "Go on, go and play with the other children. Don't waste your time with dreams." Tusitala would neither frown nor scowl. He would get up and wander away, while the women, tutting and shaking their heads, returned to their cooking and gossip, and the children went back to their noisy games, and soon they would all forget about Tusitala and his strange behavior. Each time they laughed at him, Tusitala would wander away into the forest, and wandering along the meandering woodland paths, come to his favourite secret place beneath the branches of great trees. "You shouldn't go to the forest," the mothers told him. "The land belongs to the king, and we are forbidden to go there. Even the men do not go there." Tusitala did not hear them, or if he heard, he quickly forgot what they told him. Deep in the forest he would sit and look up at the dappled light, filtering through the heavy canopy of leaves, and see birds and squirrels chasing each other along the boughs. Then his head would clear, and his thoughts no longer weigh as heavy as grey rain clouds, as they did when he was in the camp. At times like these, Tusitala told himself it was good to be alone. There were many animals in the forest, but they were not afraid of Tusitala, and he was not afraid of them. A strong trust between them had grown as he himself had grown. The animals never hurt him, or never asked questions, as all the mothers and children and men of the camp would do, and they always left him alone when he wanted to be quiet and see his dreams. At other times the animals would sit with him, the mice and the rabbits and the rats, the beetles and the spiders and the bees, the foxes and the badgers. Tusitala loved them all, but above all he loved the hundreds of doves that lived in the forest. He was entranced by the elegant landings the doves made on the branches, settling on their perches like fluttering thoughts. Their songs were soft and brought him a peace that he never experienced in the camp, and he would find himself smiling as he listened. When he held out his arms, they gently flew down to perch on his outstretched hands. Their feathers were warm and soft when he stroked them, and when he left the forest at dusk, they followed him, flying overhead in a great circle of grey and white until he reached the edge of the forest, and he could see ahead of him the warmth and safety of the campfire. "Have you found any dreams, Tusitala?" the children would ask when he returned. "Did you bring any back with you today?" He would always smile at them, but never answer, and after he had eaten, he would curl up close to the fire and fall asleep. One day, when Tusitala was older, not yet a man but no longer a young boy, he was in the glade in the forest, sitting under the great trees, watching the leaves and thinking of his dreams, when he heard the cracking of branches breaking and the sound of something forcing a path through the undergrowth. The animals around him scurried off to hide in the tree roots and the bushes, but Tusitala was not afraid. The doves were still cooing overhead. "They can see who's coming," he reminded himself. "If they're not afraid, why should I be?" Through the trees, which grew very close together, came a big white horse, and on it a young man. Tusitala did not move, but merely stared at the beautiful white horse, so richly caparisoned in finely tanned hides and cloths, and adorned with silver saddlery. He gazed, mesmerized, at the handsome young man dressed in suede and velvet, his steel-spurred heels resting in magnificently cast metal stirrups, and his legs enclosed with boots of black and buckled leather. A long hunting horn on a silken cord was slung across his shoulder, and at his side a beautifully wrought scabbard sheathed a mighty sword. As the two looked at each other, the doves stopped cooing and purring for what seemed the longest moment. Then the horse whinnied, breaking the magic silence, and it scuffed its forefeet impatiently. The doves began their song again, and the animals began to reappear from their hiding places. "Why are you sitting under that tree?" the young man asked. Tusitala did not reply, but reached out his hand and fed a nut to a red squirrel on the ground beside him. The man dismounted, and as his horse bent its head to feed from the sweet grass of the clearing, he came to where Tusitala was sitting. "I am completely lost," he confessed. "If you are not lost yourself, can you tell me where I am?" Tusitala looked up and gazed deep into the eyes of the newcomer. "Are you the prince?" Tusitala asked simply. "Are you Prince Reverie?" The young man looked at the ground and picked up a twig, and turned it slowly between his thumb and finger. What would you say if I told you I was indeed the prince? Tusitala turned away and looked up at the pigeons and stretched out his arms for his friends to come and sit on his hand, and he smiled. "I would be very happy if you were the prince," he eventually replied. "I'm so pleased you really do exist. I was beginning to wonder." The young man stood up. "Well, I am Prince Reverie. Now that you know who I am, who are you?" "My name is Tusitala. Why don't you sit down?" "Because I must find my huntsman. Will you help me, Tusitala?" "If you like," Tusitala replied, "but I'd rather stay here beneath the trees." "Wouldn't you? We have everything we want here. Why do you want to find your huntsman?" The prince looked at the ground. "Because I have to," he mumbled. "I have to, Tusitala. They will worry, and they will wonder where I am." "But you could stay here as long as you want. You are the prince," Tusitala observed. "You can do whatever you like." The prince threw away the twig, and his hand fell to the hilt of his sword, which he pulled out just a little, once, then twice, from his scabbard. "But my father is the king," Reverie replied, "and he would be angered if I was late for the tournament this evening and the banquet tomorrow at Castle Esperance. I have to be there." Tusitala stroked his favourite dove, and the white bird sang even more softly and even more deeply than ever. "Do you not like my forest and my friends?" Tusitala asked, and tossed the bird high into the air. It hovered for a moment, almost still, as though suspended on an invisible cord, before it flew to perch with its own friends. "I love your forest," Reverie smiled. "I would like to stay here forever." "It's not like this all the time," Tusitala advised. "Sometimes it's very lonely without dreams." He looked up at Reverie. "But I have my dream now, so it'll never be lonely here again." Reverie walked to his horse, which was drinking from a little brook which gurgled through rocks between moss and heather. "I wish my dreams could come true like yours," Reverie said, as he took up the bridle. "I would so much like to stay, but—" As he vaulted up into the saddle, there came the sound of a hunting horn, and the horse tossed its head and magnificent mane, and reared up on its strong hind legs. Then Tusitala heard the baying of hounds, the barking of dogs, and the shouts of the huntsmen as they drew near. The animals once again ran away to hide, and the doves flew off in a cloud of panic into the safety of the skies above the forest. "Will you be my friend?" Reverie called to Tusitala as he turned his horse's head in the direction of the hunting party. "I don't have any real friends. No one as close as I would like you to be. Will you be my friend, Tusitala?" "Of course," Tusitala shouted in reply with joy. "I will be your friend, your best friend, if you promise not to hunt any more and not to stay away for more than a week." "Good," Reverie called back over his shoulder as the big white horse rode away, crashing into the undergrowth between the great trees. "We will meet again, Tusitala. Soon, I promise." Tusitala heard the sounds of dogs and horns and the shouts of men receding, and although all was soon quiet in the forest again, and Tusitala was by himself once again, he didn't feel in the tiniest bit lonely. As usual, with the pigeons wheeling and turning above his head, he walked back to the camp. "Well," one of the gypsy girls asked him as he lay down to go to sleep, "did you bring back one of those famous dreams of yours today?" As a matter of fact, Tusitala smiled mysteriously as he stared into the fire. "I did. I finally did." The next day there was a great worry in the camp. The men had returned, but they had brought nothing to eat. There had been no deer on the plains around Castle Esperance, and no work in the orange groves or the chicken farms. The women did not know what to do, for they had no stores, and made no provision against the men returning empty-handed. As the entire camp sat in council, there seemed to be little to look forward to. Suddenly a figure stood up. "I will find food," Tusitala announced shyly. I have a friend who can help us." The children all laughed. "A friend? What friend? All you have is dreams, Tusitala." "Don't be silly," chorused the brown-eyed, big-armed mothers. "We can't eat dreams, child." "Who is this fool?" called one of the men. "Not my son," cried another. "Thank heavens." Tusitala was almost in tears as the whole camp laughed. "I do," he shouted defiantly. "I do have a friend," he sobbed, as he ran away towards the forest, never looking back, but stumbling on and on. "You wait and see," he mumbled through his tears. "You'll be sorry you laughed." Tusitala ran through the forest and did not stop, not at his clearing, not at the great trees. He ran and ran and ran. The doves flew with him just above the trees. He seldom saw them, but he knew they were there from the heartbeat sounds of their beating wings. For over an hour he ran, his strong young legs pushing through the undergrowth and jumping the streams and fallen trunks amongst the thick bracken in his path. It was almost dark when he finally stood in front of the gates of Castle Esperance, which was guarded by 2 impassive sentries. "I want to see Prince Reverie," Tusitala announced boldly, still panting after his long run. "You can't," one guard said sternly, raising his crossbow and pointing it at Tusitala's heart. "Be off with you, and don't let me see you at these gates again. We don't hold with travellers here. Count yourself lucky I don't arrest you for vagrancy. What would Prince Reverie want with you, anyway?" "But," Tusitala began. "Shut it," the second guard said. "You heard the man. Clear off." Tusitala was very sad as he slunk away in defeat, and as night fell he walked round the high, grey, unscalable walls, trying in vain to find another way in to see his friend. Suddenly he saw a tall window with a face pressed to the panes. It was the prince. "Hello!" Tusitala called out. "Reverie! Hello!" "Who's there?" Prince Reverie looked out into the night. "It's me, Tusitala, your friend from the forest. I have to see you, but your guards won't let me in. There must be another way in." "There isn't," Reverie replied despondently. "Everything's locked and barred. You can't come in, and I cannot come out to you either. My father, the king, would be furious if he knew I disobeyed to see a what?" Tusitala said. "Do you mean a homeless boy?" "He wouldn't understand," said Reverie. "Well, that's his problem," Tusitala went on. "I'm concerned only for my people. They have no food and no money to be earned so that they can buy something to eat. You and your father have enough in Castle Esperance for everyone." For a moment there was a silence. "Reverie? Are you still there?" Tusitala called anxiously. "I do have one key," the prince replied warily, "to a very secret door, but it only opens from the outside. How can I get the key to you? It's so dark that if I threw it, you'd never find it." At that moment, Tusitala's pure white dove flew out of the sky and perched on his shoulder, the only bird that had not returned to roost in the forest. "Yes," Tusitala said. "Get the key for me, my friend. I thank you." Without Tusitala speaking another word, the dove took off and flew slowly up into the night air, a whisper of white shadow against the dark castle walls, and hovered by the prince's window. At the moment the prince gave the bird the key, the king appeared behind him and saw the dove flying away, the key glinting in the shaft of moonlight that shone on the bird's beak. Pulling his son roughly away from the window, the king leant out and called for the sentries. You down there, shoot that carrion, shoot it out of the sky!" As the king shouted his order, the full moon briefly appeared from behind the clouds. The guards, who never questioned their sovereign's orders, raised their crossbows and aimed. With unerring accuracy, 2 bolts pierced the breast of the white bird as it flew towards Tusitala. "No! No!" Tusitala cried out as the dove dropped like a stone far from his hand. Above him the window slammed shut as the king dragged Reverie into the room and drew the heavy curtains. At the gate the guards laughed and returned to their duty. Tusitala searched in the dark for the wounded bird, but eventually sank beneath some bushes and cried himself to sleep. The next morning he awoke to find the dove lying dead just a few feet away, its feathers cold, damp, and limp in the early dew, the white stained red with its heart's blood. Tusitala buried the bird with the key still in its beak in the hard ground, then stared at the window where Reverie had appeared the night before. There was no sign of his friend, and Tusitala knew he would never see him again. Tusitala started on the long walk back to the camp. There was no reason to run, nothing to run for, nothing to run from. It took him all day to find his way through the forest. He collected blackberries and blueberries on the way, as well as wild strawberries, fresh young dandelion leaves, wild chives and sorrel. He was hungry, and knew that even such meagre food would be better than nothing when he reached the hungry encampment. After all, he had boasted that he would find food, although this poor man's harvest would hardly satisfy anyone. When he finally reached the camp, he heard sounds of laughter, music and dancing. As he neared the fire, the women called out, "Tusitala, you're back, you're back! Well, well! Who would have thought that you would help us find food? We found your friend, many friends, in fact." And with these words, the laughter spread around the camp. "Why are you so happy?" asked Tusitala. "Look!" cried one of the mothers, pointing to the spits over the fires. On each one there was 1, 2, or 3 birds, the fat with their plump bodies sizzling in the flames. "Wild doves," said one of the men. "We didn't know there were so many. We've shot enough for a week. Thank you," he said. "Now we know you're one of us." Exhausted, Tusitala sat down by the fire and stared deep into the flames. Without thinking, he pulled some of the berries and leaves from his pockets and ate them. "What are you looking at, Tusitala?" asked one of the women. "Nothing," the boy replied in the faintest of whispers, hardly moving his lips. "Absolutely nothing at all."
That was Tusitala and the Prince, a fable by David Evans, read by Jamie Richard Stewart.
Arbury Drama and Fiction. Hear more drama and fiction, old and new, on arburyproductions.co.uk.